Now, if I'm being completely honest with you, when they first announced that they were going to do an off-Broadway revival of Cats in a ballroom style, my immediate thought was just because Jellicles can doesn't mean that Jellicles necessarily should. However, was I anticipating this becoming like one of the hits of the summer in New York? Did I foresee that this show would, as far as the word revival goes, be one of the greatest revivals of a musical I have perhaps ever seen? If this is all sounding a little bit unbelievable to you, let me tell you why. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel, or hello to you if you are listening on a podcast platform. My name is Mickey Joe, and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I am a professional theatre critic here on social media, and today I'm going to be talking all about the new off-Broadway revival of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats. This was produced at the brand new Perelman Performing Arts Centre in downtown Manhattan, and it is notable because it's not a traditional revival of the musical Cats. This production chose to relocate what we'll call the plot of the show and set it in the midst of queer underground ballroom culture. A choice that had many people initially saying, okay, but at the same time it's Cats, and those of us who have seen the motion picture version know that it can't exactly get worse. Now it's at this point I have to share an intimate secret with you because I am actually an unironic fan of the musical Cats. It's one of the two shows that I was raised on, watching the VHS recording of that production at my grandmother's house growing up, and while dramaturgically I can acknowledge and understand all of the criticisms that people have about the show, I have always had an enormous soft spot for it, and the narrative has always made sense to me. Anyway, while most people were concerned they wouldn't necessarily enjoy this production because they don't like Cats as a musical, I was concerned I wouldn't necessarily enjoy this because I like Cats as a musical too much. Was I suddenly going to be a purist about it? That's not a way I usually feel when it comes to revivals, but how would I feel about a Cats in which they weren't really Cats? And if you're already confused, I will explain what I mean by that as I tell you about this production. So today I'm going to be letting you know what exactly this looks like, whether or not we can expect to see it again in future because this was just a limited off-Broadway engagement, and critically what made it work as well as it did. Now if you enjoyed today's review, make sure to subscribe or follow me wherever you are seeing or hearing this review. Stay tuned for many more coming very soon, and don't forget to comment down below with all of your thoughts and feelings, especially if you have been lucky enough to see CATS the Jellicle Ball for yourself in New York. I would love to know what other people thought of this and whether or not, like me, you were a Cats fan beforehand. In the meantime, here is why I loved it. So like I said, this production combines the musical Cats with underground LGBT queer ballroom culture. If you don't know what Cats is, I'm going to tell you about it. If you don't know what ballroom culture is, I'm going to tell you about that as well. And I'm going to explain how the two of them are able to come together. So Cats was an early 1980s stage musical scored by Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber using the text of a T.S. Eliot poetry book called Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. Throughout his career, Lloyd Webber has been a hugely successful composer, best known perhaps for The Phantom of the Opera, but he has never been a lyricist, and so adapting poetry in this way allowed him to work without a creative collaborator. Now, the show was produced by Sir Cameron Mackintosh. It was one of his first big hits of the 1980s, which would be a very successful decade for him. It was directed by Sir Trevor Nunn, and critically, it was choreographed by the late great Dame Gillian Lynne. And in many ways, it was her creative work on the show that afforded it so much of its longevity. And in fact, the theatre where Cats originally played in London, formerly known as the New London Theatre, has since been renamed in honour of Dame Gillian Lynne. It is now the Gillian Lynne Theatre. That's the same theatre where another Andrew Lloyd Webber musical named Cinderella opened a few years ago, but I don't know anything about that. Cats, meanwhile, very long-running musical in the West End and on Broadway, and has an extensive life worldwide, a big part of which is, like something like The Lion King, you don't necessarily need to be able to understand the language in order to be able to appreciate it, so it can play to a very broad tourist audience. Essentially what you have is a cast of phenomenally talented dancers dressed in leotards, leg warmers, tails and ears, portraying humanoid cats named Jellicle Cats, which originally was baby talk for how people say dear little cats, like when they're talking to their pets, like dear little cat, Jellicle cat. And you could categorize this show as a dance piece. It was choreographed originally with this balletic style of choreography that captured the idea of feline movement, but elevated it beyond the concept of just crawling around on the floor, the way that these performers stretched and the gentle elegance of these slow extensions and then the passion of these faster playful sections. It offered both hyper high energy and a sort of a refined elegance, as well as occasionally a little bit of sass and malice. And between this and Lloyd Webber's deeply satisfying score and a cast of varied, colourful characters, you can absolutely enjoy this show purely on a surface level. There is a narrative there if you want to go looking for it, and I will tell you a little bit about it now, but if you want to really get to grips with the plot of Cats, I made a video years ago where I dressed up as a cat, drank a bottle of wine, and attempted to explain it to you. I honestly think it was some of my best work. But the idea is that these Jellicle cats are meeting up in one place, as they apparently do once a year, and awaiting their Jellicle leader, it's sort of like a cult really, who will inform them which of them has lived a Jellicle life of such quality that they will be chosen, they will become the Jellicle choice, and they are the ones who get to die, ascend to heaven, and come back in a new cat life. And so throughout the show, when they're not simply celebrating and basking in the joy of all being together and having, you know, their annual party, they are sort of auditioning to be the Jellicle choice, and they are showcasing themselves. It's not unlike the musical Six in that way. Everyone is sort of taking turns in order to make their case. Now this is where the crossover with ballroom culture comes in. So I'm not an expert on ballroom culture, but I am in fact gay. And I've seen Paris is Burning and I've seen Pose, one of which is a documentary about a specific ball, the other of which is a televised series all about that culture and that lifestyle during the AIDS epidemic. And if you've seen RuPaul's Drag Race, then I'm hesitant to compare the two, but they are built around similar ideas and this sort of a competition element. The idea of a ball would be that the community would come together and a panel of judges would decide the winner in a series of different categories, and those categories could be any number of different things. There were face categories, which is all about just like making your face as beautiful as possible and serving as much of your face as you can. You have body categories, you have dance categories, you have like costuming categories in terms of presenting a particular look or a particular character or a particular style or trying to look as realistic as possible. And the other major component of this that you probably ought to know about is that these groups competed often in houses, overseen and managed by a house mother. You have things like the House of La Beija and the House of Extravaganza. These would become communities all of their own that would support and help each other. I like to think of it like the Gay Olympics, honestly. But when it comes to taking a piece of theatre and recontextualizing it, that is, taking it out of the setting that it was originally written in and putting it into a different one, which is what has happened here, you only need one strong element to tether it to that new world, I think. And this whole competitive idea in these different categories with ballroom culture is enough to take Cats from where it originally was to this new setting. It also helps that Cats, in terms of its lyrics, in terms of the poems that it's based on, isn't strongly tethered to much of a real place. Like, it makes reference to British locations, but a lot of it has always felt like nonsense that people don't really pay attention to anyway, so it doesn't matter that much. So with that context on both of these ideas, let me tell you about what this production actually looks like with Cats in a ballroom setting. So I don't know whether this performing arts space is an adaptive one that can have different types of performances. My inclination is to believe that it probably is. The way that the stage was configured for this performance is we had this long, thin runway and a floor area around it on three sides that the performers were moving in and out of. There was also cabaret table seating around that runway, situating the audience to feel, and you've heard this word a lot recently, immersed in this ballroom setting. We were meant to feel like we were there participating in the ball, like we were arriving at it rather than a theatre audience watching a piece of entertainment. And that choice did an awful lot for the culture of the audience at that performance. I saw a midweek matinee, who are famously usually the lowest energy audiences that you will encounter. This audience was wild and engaged and excited, and it was a great time. And that is what you get when you make creative choices that allow an audience to feel like they are part of this world. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that this is Cats without Cats, because these performers are not dressed like Cats. Instead, they are wearing these vibrant, exciting queer nightlife outfits, and they do just still sort of feel like these mysterious and intriguing and colourful and exotic creatures of the night. And honestly, there's enough crossover language with like fierce and kitty girl that it somehow completely works. Cat, kitty, cat, 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 and whatnot. Now, the way that we actually get into the world of Cats is that we have a DJ who is the first to arrive on stage, who is going through a box of records, looks at each one, and then holds up the record for, I guess, the original recording of Cats. And there is a big cheer of recognition in the audience. Goes up to their little DJ booth, puts this on, and then we hear the overture, and we see different characters start to arrive onto the stage. This is a condensed cast of characters based on the usual size of Cats. They've really streamlined the number of people that they need here. There are a couple of people that fulfill a few different roles, but for the most part, your central cat characters are still retained as they are. You still have a Munkerstrap, a Rum-Tum-Tugger, an Old Deuteronomy, a Macavity, a Demeter, a Bombad Urena, a Mr. Mistopheles. Of course, you also have a Grisabella, but more about her later. One example of where characters have been combined is that one performer plays a character who is both Cassandra and Skimbleshanks, and for example, Mungojerry and Rumpelteazer are still retained, but the other twins, Tantamile and Coricopat, they don't really offer much to the narrative. We don't need them as much, so they are gone. Now, in terms of cut material, for those of you who are curious, we do not have Growl Tiger's Last Stand, we do not have the Peaks and the Pollicles, because that wouldn't really make sense in this context. What this production focuses on instead are either the songs that allow them to all bask in celebration together, like Jellicle songs for Jellicle Cats, or the ones that showcase individuals, like the old Gumby Cat, or Busterford Jones, or Mr. Mistopheles, or the Rum-Tum-Tugger, or Mungojerry and Rumpelteazer. Carrying on with this concept, Munkerstrap, who generally narrates the show in its most traditional form, fulfills the role of MC here, which, if you've seen the TV show Pose, is the role fulfilled by Billy Porter's character, Pray Tell. The head of the judging panel, meanwhile, is the most senior and revered of this community, Old Deuteronomy, played by Andre de Shields. A few categories do take place before his arrival, and then the ball continues after his entrance during the show's first act. And it's these different categories that justify the songs. I'll give you one particularly inspired example of this. So the song Busterford Jones begins, right? And I'm already, like, the concept is already working for me at this point. We've had a few songs. It's been very, like, dance-based thus far, and like the whole concept of transposing this original balletic Dame Gillian Lynn dance language into something more contemporary, into something incorporating Vogue and incorporating a lot of other historic queer ballroom dance styles, that works for me. We are still using dance language to tell this story, we're just using a different kind of a dance. And I feel like that kind of recontextualization happens in the dance world quite often, probably more so, honestly, than it does in traditional musical theatre. All the same, we get to Busterford Jones, and I'm thinking, how the hell is this going to work? How is this character, who is known in the traditional version of the show as being a very fat cat because he scrounges from, you know, the well-to-do and the patrons of nice pubs and clubs and restaurants, and because of this is wildly respected by the rest of the cats in his community, how is this character going to fit into the ballroom world? And after beginning to sing the song, the announcement and the signage comes on at the back of the stage saying the category is body, and Busterford Jones walks the body category against a couple other cats, including the Rum-Tum-Tugger, who is giving you like chiseled, athletic, masculine, and Busterford Jones, who I gather is also the bartender of this ballroom community within the lore of this production and is portrayed by a non-binary performer, is giving you plus size, sexy, feminine. It's so fun watching this category in particular, watching the audience root for these different characters. But I just about fell apart at this moment of the show. When it was announced that Busterford Jones was walking a body category, I was like, obviously, and of course. I'm a fool for not seeing that coming 100 miles away, but it makes so much sense and is just one indication of how well this concept works. Another example of a really great choice within this particular production, this goes later into the show, but they tease the arrival of Macavity, as they always have done in this material, and I'm at this point again getting into thinking, I don't want Macavity to come in as an antagonist. This is all so joyous and so celebratory. I don't want there to be that much tension, like you have animosity between these rival ballroom houses and these different communities within this culture, but I don't want a villain to come in and disrupt the queer joy that is CATS the Jellicle Ball. And instead what this becomes is Macavity and Demeter and Bombalurina, who are in league with Macavity, who are part of the house of Macavity, rather than being terrified by him or have PTSD or whatever is going on in the normal version of the show. They all walk a category as a group in which they have stolen these gorgeous block colour outfits, and at the end of the song Macavity, the police arrive in order to, you know, take these back and arrest Macavity. And Old Deuteronomy offers himself instead to the police and is then arrested and taken away. It's a great substitution for the way that Macavity traditionally kidnaps Old Deuteronomy, and, you know, rather than piercing the joy of it all and creating division within this queer community, it's a timely reminder of, you know, the things that happened at the time, and it kind of invokes the Stonewall riots, and it kind of invokes like historic police prejudice and the fact that this was an underground oppressed community. It's a very clever choice. And on a purely superficial level, the way that they say the word Macavity, not as a shriek of fear throughout the show, but as simply a sort of a sassy acknowledgement where they're like, Macavity, rather than Macavity. It's genius. That being said, does this concept work completely? And the answer is no, it's not a perfect fit. This is, as always with recontextualizing a piece of theatre, putting a square peg into a round hole, except it works probably better than that. I would characterize this as putting like a hexagonal peg into a round hole. The thing fits completely, but there are little gaps around the edges. What I mean by that is you still have these issues. If you really pay attention to the lyrics, they are still singing about being cats and doing cat things. It looks fantastic. It feels fantastic. The whole thing plays dramatically. You understand what's going on. Probably easier to follow this version of the show than, you know, whatever plot there is in the original version of Cats. But if you listen to them, they are still singing about, like, Old Deuteronomy basking in the sun, sitting on the church wall and having buried 108 of his wives, and Mr. Mistopheles sitting on the roof of the family home, and the rum-tum-tugger not wanting to eat any cheese if you offer him fish, and all of this stuff. Like, if you pay attention to the words that are being said, there is still a disconnect with what it is that you are seeing on stage. And while there are many more moments that work spectacularly well, there are a couple of moments that don't quite connect for me, which I'm going to tell you about now. So I'll preface this by telling you about one of the highlight points of the show, which is the arrival of Andre de Shields as Old Deuteronomy. The entire audience is prompted to stand in anticipation of this. He enters after, you know, this whole big build-up of a song announcing that he is going to be arriving. Half of the first act has already happened. It's this huge long introduction and then this very dramatic reveal, and he's got a giant wig and a fantastic outfit, and he is slowly processing down the length of the stage, and everyone is going wild and cheering and saying yas and doing this with the fans. For those of you listening on podcast platforms, I'm thwacking the fan repeatedly. That's what I'm demonstrating right now. Oh, and it's cool. That all works very well, and who wouldn't want to give that kind of a salute to Broadway legend and Tony Award winner Andre de Shields? I know I do, but then when you have legitimate ballroom culture legend Junior LaBeija playing Gus the Theatre Cat in the second act, which is another opportunity within the show to, you know, have a legendary performer taking on one of the roles. You know, he only comes in for that one number. It was Sir John Mills. In the recording, it was Sir Ian McKellen. In the unfortunate film version, great casting of Junior LaBeija, but I don't know that that audience necessarily clocks who it is, because they are not greeted with the same extraordinary reverence, which I feel is deserved. More to the point, that song, which is performed by the character of Jelly Loram, who is portrayed in this production by Shireen Pimentel, kind of falls flat, because where a couple of the other moments of the show musically have been allowed to feel a little bit more contemporary, a little bit more appropriate for that time and for that setting, this is still sung very traditionally. Shireen has a beautiful voice with a lovely classical tone. She went to Juilliard, for crying out loud, and she has done a lot of work in the musical theatre world already that reflects that. But it's sort of not the way you want this version of the show to sound. It's a vocal performance that would be completely at home, again, in a traditional production of Cats, but it doesn't sound anything like a ballroom version. version. Essentially, I feel like I want all of the characters in this production to sound like the Broadway cast recording of Hell's Kitchen does right now. That is the energy and the sound and the tone that I want from this production of Cats. The other shortcoming, from a narrative and performance perspective really, is the Grizabella moment. And this is fascinating to me, because normally out of the chaos that is Cats, Grisabella's arc is the one thing that people can latch onto and understand. When she comes in at the beginning and they're all rejecting her, we can interpret that body language, even if the song that they're singing to her doesn't really make complete sense when they're singing about, like, she haunted many a low resort. It is clear that they do not like her and that she is sad about that, and she is sort of this lowly, rejected cat. As the show progresses, however, it is old Deuteronomy, the wise leader, who offers her the opportunity to, like, tell her story, and he gives her space within the community, and she comes back and she sings this triumphant breakout song, Memory. And even if you haven't seen Cats on stage, you probably know the song Memory. It's huge, it's the one really enormous vocal number in a show otherwise filled with phenomenal dance talent, and it's kind of the narrative highlight of most traditional productions of Cats. That is the strongest plot moment in the thing. And in this production, it kind of becomes the weakest plot moment in the thing, only because it isn't so much tethered to anything. Like, we have another cat who, not unlike Jemima in the original version, kind of looks to Grizabella and encourages her and sings in the middle eight of Memory in order to help her regain her strength and do the beautiful key change, touch me. Hebel. But it is even less clear in this version of the show why Grizabella, who is holding a trophy, who is clearly some sort of previous winner within the ballroom community, some sort of a previous legend, why she is shunned in the first place. And I think some of the staging reflects that. Like, they aren't as against her as they are in the usual version of the show, and we just don't get much of a narrative around the idea. We also kind of don't give her the triumphant reveal that she needs, because when we first see her, she's kind of dressed down, and when she comes on to sing Memory, she enters in this gorgeous shimmering gown with an opera glove. It's very drama. She looks absolutely stunning. But the beginning of that particular moment of music is not really conducive to the reveal of a gorgeous dress. Like, you almost want her to come out in, I don't know, like a cape or like a gown over the top tied so that she can tear it off like a coat and reveal the dress on Touch Me. That is the moment that you want there. That is the moment that you want that to happen, and it would give it the impact that it deserves. Performance-wise, I thought she did a great job of singing the thing, and there is clearly an enormous amount of passion being conveyed in this performance. I think I just wanted the whole thing to bubble over more at that moment. That has to be the boiling point, and it has to be a complete abandon, throwing your arms out, whatever it needs to be, and just letting everything rip emotionally. And it still felt a little too restrained, a little too controlled. I needed that to just be a force of a moment, because it didn't feel like it earned an erupting standing ovation the same way other moments throughout the show had, because of incredible choreography, because of remarkable feats of dance and exciting reveals and just like gag-worthy moments, basically. And I think there is lots that you could do with Grizabella, and I love the way that they cast this. You know, this is cast with a trans woman of colour, and there is so much that you could do with the storytelling here around, like, remembering elders within the LGBTQ plus community, like, again, invoking the history of ballroom culture and the history going back to the Stonewall riots, and the reality that subsections of the queer community are now being sort of shunned and disenfranchised. You could say something very legitimately important here, and maybe they're trying to, even with this casting approach. All of the ingredients are there to make this a powerful part of the show. I just need it to have explicit meaning and far more feeling in the delivery. Honestly, the only other thing that I think could be improved with this revival, and it's sort of beyond their control, is the music. And there are a handful of moments that either with subtle changes, I wasn't sure, because I didn't think that the orchestrations were allowed to be changed for this production. I felt like I read somewhere that they had to retain the original version. They weren't being given that much artistic license to completely reinterpret the material, but there are some moments that sounded very synthy and very appropriate. I don't know if they were little interludes between the more substantial songs, or if it was just a happy accident, because both ballroom culture and the original production of Cats existed within the 1980s. Potentially another reason why this production works as well as it does. But here is the thing. Andrew Lloyd Webber has since been to see this, allegedly loved it. Producer Michael Harrison has also been to see this with him. Potentially they were looking at the possibility of a transfer. I'm very suspicious of the fact that they were both there together in the same week. But if they are on board with this revival, I feel like they could offer them a little bit more leniency around the idea of reinterpreting, just at the very least, the music and the orchestrations. If not restructuring the score, then just allowing the sound of it to feel more appropriate to that era, to that setting, because it just on occasion still sounds a little bit too traditional musical theatre when you want it to feel like a club mix. And each and every tiny addition that they have made, whether it's a little spoken section or a little like sung repeated phrase, makes the world of difference in justifying this displacement, in making the whole thing feel more cohesive. When Old Deuteronomy enters and they are chanting Old Deuteronomy, da ba da ba da, Old Deuteronomy, like it's so good. Every time they announce what the category is, it works and it becomes a punchline where we've already met these cats, like I told you with the Buster for Jones moment. Honestly, whoever came up with this concept is a genius. Now, before I continue singing the praises of this creative team, I want to tell you about some of the performers. Some of them come from a more traditional musical theatre world, some of them come from the ballroom world. Let's find out more about some of them together, because not many names that were known to me. Andre de Shields, obviously, I was already familiar with. We know his work from Hadestown and The Wiz, and going back decades on Broadway. He does a fantastic job as Old Deuteronomy here, which is a deceptively difficult sing, I will say. Like, it gets right up there at the end, and this is one of those moments of the show where you're like, it's still Cats, because even after all of the fun of everything, and even after all of walking all these categories and the dance of it all and these vibrant costumes, and after all of the joy that it emits, we still have to sit through the song about how cats aren't dogs. But it is what it is, and Andre guides us through it with his familiar mellifluousness and his, composure and his pomp, and he is so regal, which works so well for this role. Junior LaBeija offers a very similar kind of a performance, but where Andre de Shields is just very, stately and head held high, Junior LaBeija is that little bit more sassy and demanding of attention, which I enjoy as well. Listen, he's playing a theatre cat, that feels appropriate. Then you have Antwain Hopper, maybe my favourite performance out of this entire ensemble. First of all, I defy you to watch anybody else when he is on stage, but second of all, he's playing McCavity, and he has this manic energy to him the entire time, but he is not a malicious villain in this version of the piece. He is just very driven, maybe ambitious, maybe a little bit of a cheat, maybe he's an entire thief, but he brings energy to that stage, the likes of which is the lifeblood of this production. There were so many in this cast that were hugely impressive because of the voguing dance prowess. Robert Silk Mason as Mr. Mistopheles was one of those. My goodness. I do think there's a bit of a dissimilarity in that particular dance style, where it is very often all about the body and all about these poses and all about kind of facially looking very unbothered and very yeah, I did that very impressive, and I fell to the floor and I kicked my head and I can do it again, and it's quite cat-like as well at the same time, to just sort of be quite blasé about it and filled with a sense of ennui. It's not what we're necessarily used to from theatre performers who will give you face and energy. Baby as Victoria is another one. This is an iconic dance role, like the white cat in the original production of Cats, whose little solo moment near the beginning of the show was always described by Dame Gillian Lynn as a metaphor for a sexual awakening of a young cat whose first time it is at the Jellicle Ball. Baby's performance here encapsulates that same kind of youth and intrigue, but just kind of ingenue brilliance as well, as did Emma Sophia as Cassandra / Skimbleshanks, which is still one of the most fun numbers in the show, and Teddy Wilson Jr. as Syllabub, who also sang beautifully. As well as dance skill, the other thing that so many of these performers bring is extraordinary personality and characterization, and that is just fantastic. Javier Reyes plays Jenny Anydots as a drag performer, as a drag mother, who is exuberant and charming and very attentively tending to and fussing over her daughter. You have the two sort of henchwomen of McCavity, Demeter and Bombalurina. They're played by Bebe Nicole Simpson and Garnett Williams. Both do a fantastic job, sound fantastic as well. It's worth saying every single performer who enters this space has to exist on the thing with nothing less than 100% confidence and conviction in order to justify even standing there. The show is basically 2 acts of one of those dance circles where someone goes into the middle of the space and then has to immediately prove themselves. Nora Shell plays Buster Jones and they get one of the most extraordinary audience reactions. It's such a charismatic performance. I think they're brilliant. And Jonathan Burke and Deva Huesca play Mungo Jerry and Rumpelteazer respectively. Again, both dance and personality with these characters. It's a brilliant double act between the two of them. It's funny, it's engaging. Grizabella is played by Tempest Chastity Moore, as should be with this production. This is a ballroom icon and legend, and I feel like I want her to own that as much in the final moments of the show, post the key change in memory, as much as Andre de Shields does in his first entrance as Old Deuteronomy. And I wonder if there is too much of a connection to the sorrow of the character to really find the abandon and the, you know what, I am here, and if these other cats don't like me, that's fine, because I'm Grizabella and I'm going to sing this key change, god damn it. That is the energy that I want to see and that I am sure that she has, 100%. Finally, Sidney James Harcourt plays the Rum Tum Tugger. I love the way he's characterized this role. It's a little bit like Mask Jim Bro, it's a little bit like douchey model, and if everyone enters this space with confidence, his interpretation of that is a lot of ego, which makes perfect sense for the Rum Tum Tugger. And it's one of the moments that actually probably works better in this version of the show than it did in the original, because it's a song all about him being very capricious and like whatever it is that you offer him, he wants to do something else, but it's always staged and costumed and characterized in a very like sexy, seductive way, like he's a rock and roll star cat and all the little kittens are fascinated by him. And in this one they have enough freedom and humanity to be able to do something closer to that in real life. He's very watchable on stage, and if I attempt to describe that in any more detail, I risk becoming unprofessional. But I want to save the final section of this review for the geniuses on this creative team. So this has been directed by Xylon Livingston and Bill Rauch, who is also the artistic director of the Perelman Performing Arts Centre. And the thing that most immediately struck me after seeing it was, of all the revivals I've ever seen, I can't think of one that has paid such careful attention to its source material, and everything that they bring out of that, every new thing that they create, every single detail of this production from before it begins, from when you enter the auditorium, is inspired by details within the text. Like, they are taking this show and they are trying to make it something completely different to what it's been before, but in doing that they are looking at every detail of what it already is, and that is the key. That is the genius thing. Jamie Lloyd's Sunset Boulevard worked because it was in service of the text. There are other recontextualized productions that don't work because they try and ignore that. But from the off, you had these boards as we were entering in, advertising the ball, situating us to feel like we were going to an actual ball. They weren't saying Cats at the Perelman Performing Arts Centre, they were saying the Jellicle Ball at the Russell Hotel, which is one throwaway lyric from the Heaviside Layer song at the end of the show. They took that, they used that, and throughout the piece, even if the lyrics don't completely make sense in this new context, they are paying attention to the lyrics, they're using the lyrics, and every opportunity that they have using this storytelling, using these characters to justify this new world, every connection they can find between Cats and Ballroom, they have found it. And there are a handful of nice little accidental crossover moments that they use spectacularly well, that they notice, that they picked up on, and that they make sure that you recognize in the audience as well. A lot of the very ethereal and majestic and slightly mournful ways that T.S. Eliot writes about these cats also ring true for the queer performers and the queer characters that you're seeing on stage. I must also talk about the choreography by Arturo Lyons and Omari Wiles. Much like in previous productions of Cats, this is really the creative star here. All of these like competitive dance-off voguing moments. You have entire sections that are like old school versus new school. And this has a handful of objectives to portray simultaneously, because the dance has to characterize each individual, which it does very well. We have to understand the difference between these different houses, which we do, and sort of their different subcultures. We also have to understand who wins in each instance, and I feel like it's important for us to also be on board with that, which we are. There is so much personality, there is so much passion within this dance language that they use. I would like for there to be a few more moments of group dance. There is one really striking visual when they are dancing down the length of the runway and doing this simultaneous group choreography at the beginning when they're singing "Jellicles do and Jellicles can." That is sensational. I want a few more moments like that because it's so powerful when they do. I think we need a little bit more togetherness, a little bit more structured choreography, because we do have a lot of moments of chaos and everyone doing different things, as you would get in a ball. You know, it looks quite authentically like a ball when you have these different people moving around each other on the floor, doing different choreography and kind of responding to each other, and that feels so authentic. It feels so accurate. I just want in the Jellicle Ball itself, the number, I want there to be a little bit more of a sense of like structured choreography, I think, just for a few moments. Queen Jean was the costume designer for this production, and the costumes are extraordinary. My god, the use of colour. Again, the cohesion between the houses. You understand these different subcultures, the reveals that we do get. I know I told you Grisabella wasn't a reveal at the right moment, but looked stunning, and the reveals that we do get at those different moments, and the use of colour. It is such a fun and vibrant use of colour. I absolutely love it. It feels more today than it does feel specifically like 1980s, but it is so much of it absolutely gorgeous work. And I love that it doesn't feel preoccupied with having to look feline. Like, these are just characters and people, and it works. Rachel Houck's scenic design, I think, is just perfect, and I think it would work very well in a space like the Circle in the Square on Broadway. I'm just saying, I know there's a lot of debate online as to whether or not something like this that, you know, encapsulates the beauty of underground, like, queer subculture ought to be on Broadway at all. But I think for these performers, and I think for these creators, I think this deserves mainstream recognition. And I think, you know, if tourists were going to CATS for years, tourists would continue to go to this, I think, or they ought to, and have as much to enjoy from it, because you are presenting ostensibly the same things, the same entertainment factor, with actually, you know, a more substantial narrative running through the entire thing, and it would enlighten a lot of people about the joy of queer ballroom culture. That's important both for the youth of today's queer community, myself included, and, you know, the wider community and the non-queer community. Speaking of which, I dare say, without knowing the specificities of their work, that Josephine Kearns, who was a dramaturg and gender consultant on this production, also deserves an enormous amount of credit. Shout out to Nakia Mathis as the hair and wig designer, also looked fantastic. Adam Honore for the lighting design, stunning. Kai Harada's sound design, it sounded fantastic. Brittany Bland's projection design, I loved the moments where we had this projection of a performer dancing across these lit windows behind the stage at the start of the thing. It was so familiar of the original production of CATS, and the silhouette of these dancers within the cat eyes, that original logo, but reconceiving it immediately for this new world of the show. And that's the through line of all of this creative work. Paying attention to the original and honouring the original, and not trying to change it and throw this kind of sparkly thing over the top and erase what it was, but taking all of the value that they can find in it and showing what that can mean in a different context and what that can mean to a different community. And through that, I think a lot of people are able to better understand the original plot of CATS with this new framing device. Now, I could keep going. Every second I'm talking about this, a new thing is coming to me that I absolutely loved about this production, but for now I feel like you got the gist of my thoughts about CATS at the Perelman Performing Arts Centre. I am so glad that we basically shaped our North American trip around this production and getting the chance to see it, but I also hope that other people have the chance to see it, and I hope it gets a future life, whether that is back at the same venue or whether that is on Broadway. I have my fingers crossed, and so should you. In the meantime, thank you so much. I hope you have enjoyed this review. If you did, make sure to subscribe to me if you're watching here on YouTube. Turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of my upcoming review videos and other theatre-related content. If you're listening on a podcast platform, make sure to follow me there as well. And don't forget to comment with your thoughts about CATS or CATS the Jellicle Ball if you've seen this production. In the meantime, I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!